Hey everyone! Welcome to The Young and the Restless. I'm Jane, and I'm so excited to have you here. If you love Young and the Restless, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Alright, let's dive right in. The Young and the Restless spoilers for Tuesday, July 22nd, state that danger will explode for trapped Nick Newman and Sharon Newman, while Kane Ashby receives a harsh warning. For starters, Nikki Newman will confront Kane and lay down the law. Nikki will always do whatever it necessary to protect her children, and she will make this clear to Kane. Nikki may also remind Kane that Victor Newman is a powerful man who should not be messed with. Kane may deny killing Damian Kane and framing Nick, but Nikki will put him on notice nonetheless. If Nikki realizes Nick is absent, she may have another cause to lash out. Kane may not be aware that Carter has placed Nick and Sharon under house arrest, but they will be locked up together in Tuesday's episode. Once Sharon and Nick are imprisoned in a room, there will undoubtedly be some risk. Whether it's because of the armed guard or the killer, more unrest is building in Nice. Nick will be wounded later in the week of July 21st to 25th, so YNR will prepare the basis for the pandemonium with some foreboding scenes in the meanwhile. Over with Victor, he will inform Audra Charles that he anticipates the Kyle Abbott and Claire Newman breakup that he was promised. If Audra can't produce that split, she can forget about Vibrante money. This might be disastrous news for Audra's career and all of her hopes for success. Despite the fact that Kyle has discovered her current ploy, Audra may not give up. If Audra plays her cards correctly, she may find another method to break up Kyle and Audra. According to the Young and the Restless spoilers, Kyle Abbott will suffer for his horrific betrayal of Claire Newman in 3 ways. A huge character flaw is brewing, so let's speak about Kyle's error and all the issues it will cause. Kyle and Audra Charles indulged in some intimate moments behind closed doors on YNR's July 18th episode. Despite Audra and Kyle's attempts to hide their betrayal, their deeds will come back to haunt them. Audra will face her own repercussions in due course, but let us focus on Kyle for the time being. Kyle will suffer in at least 3 ways, so we should go through the list and prepare for the consequences of his poor decisions. 1. Kyle's remorse is eating him alive. For starters, Kyle's remorse over what he has done will consume him whenever he returns to Genoa City. When Kyle learns that Cole Howard has died, he will feel terrible for not being there for Claire, especially since he was busy letting passion explode with Audra in Nice. Kyle may try to cope with his remorse by keeping Claire unaware of his treachery, but he'll find it difficult to hide how bad he feels. 2. Claire's anguish and rage are unleashed. Of course, we should examine Claire's reaction when she learns what Kyle and Audra did in France. When it comes to soapy secrets like this, there is always a countdown to reveal. Kyle will eventually have to witness the sadness in Claire's eyes and hear her sorrow. With Claire's ferocious outbursts, Kyle will be in a lot of agony. Kyle will find it difficult to harm Claire because he cares so much about her, but he should have considered this before getting involved with Audra. 3. Victor enforces the $5 million contract. We can't forget Kyle signed a contract promising to pay $5 million and leave Genoa City if he breaks Claire's heart. Since Kyle is on the approach of doing so, Victor Newman will undoubtedly enforce the conditions of their agreement. Kyle may be able to avoid the moving away part because Michael Mealer does not appear to be quitting the show. Kyle may have to pay the $5 million as promised and deal with any hidden conditions in that paperwork. According to the Young and the Restless spoilers, Kyle will face criticism from a variety of sources, so stay tuned for all of the worrisome developments. The Young and the Restless recap for Monday, July 21st, indicates that Sharon and Nick Newman will become Carter's prisoners, while Kyle Abbott thwarts Audra Charles' seduction plan. On Monday's YNR episode, Kyle and Audra will move their makeout session to the bed. It will appear that Audra and Kyle are going to breach an even more intense boundary, but Kyle will back off and say he is onto Audra. Kyle will criticize Audra's attempt to attract him and think it's deplorable of her to use Damian Kane's death as part of her strategy. Before denying the existence of a conspiracy, Audra would claim she was truly terrified and distraught. Kyle, on the other hand, will think Audra's Vibrante money was contingent on her jeopardizing his friendship with Claire Newman and breaking his agreement with Victor. Kyle would say that he was testing Audra and now knows she would go all the way after making it apparent that he loves Claire too much to give it up for a fling with Audra. Audra will continue to deny that she was playing Kyle, believing that he was equally interested in what happened between them, but he will insist that the game is done and will inform Victor that she has lost. Audra will stomp out of Kyle's sleeping automobile with an intense expression on her face. Meanwhile, Billy Abbott and Jack Abbott will have a major disagreement over Abbott Communications, prompting Billy to quit their partnership and hint at getting Kane Ashby to invest instead. Next, Nick will accuse Phyllis Summers of sacrificing their history and relationship to protect Kane, but she will deny it. Phyllis will hint that someone may seek to implicate both Kane and Nick, but Nick will accuse her of betraying him for a job. After disclosing information about the destroyed surveillance film, Nick will disclose his plan to climb down the mountain and contact the authorities. Phyllis will try to talk Nick out of it, but he will go ahead with his plan. Once Nick returns to his sleeping car to prepare for his voyage, Sharon will appear and insist on accompanying him. Carter and a beefy security will come soon after, and Nick will find he has been placed under house arrest for Kane's safety and the peace of mind of the other visitors. Nick will point out that Carter does not have the power to do this, but Carter will urge Nick not to force the guard to draw his weapon. Sharon will make her presence known, prompting Carter to declare she must follow them and that they have no choice. In other words, Carter will imprison Nick and Sharon, with no recourse. When Phyllis meets with Billy, she will emphasize that she honestly feels Kane is innocent. Billy wants Chancellor, and Phyllis wants a job, so they'll create an alliance. According to the Young and the Restless spoilers, Phyllis will realize they need to concoct a plan to get Kane off the hook, so stay tuned for updates on if they succeed. Nick's bloody wound loomed big as he limped into the dimly lighted alley, each step delivering a harsh jolt of anguish to his damaged body. The wound on his side was deep, the fabric of his shirt soaked through with scarlet, and he could feel the warmth of his own blood dripping down his leg. The metallic aroma assaulted his nostrils, a somber reminder of the brutality that had driven him here. The echoes of heavy footsteps came louder behind him, each one a hammer blow to his frayed nerves. Kane was approaching. There was no mistaking the man's methodical, predatory stride. He walked like a wolf closing in on wounded prey. Nick's breath came in ragged gasps, his eyesight blurring at the corners, but he couldn't afford to pause. Not now. Not while Kane was so close. The lane twisted and swirled, a labyrinth of shadow and filth, but Nick was familiar with these streets. He had grown up in the city and knew its secrets, shortcuts, and dead ends. But none of that mattered if he couldn't outrun the unrelenting force pressing down on him. Kane was more than just a man, he was a storm, a force of nature cloaked in leather and steel, his reputation following him like a whispered curse. Nick had heard the stories, how Kane ripped through the syndicate's enforcers like paper, leaving a trail of broken bodies in his wake, each with a message inscribed in blood. And now, the same rage was aimed toward him. The wound throbbed, sending a steady pulse of pain that threatened to buckle his knees. Nick gritted his teeth and forced himself to continue moving. He knew this day was coming. When he crossed Kane, stole from him, and betrayed him, he signed his own death sentence. But survival had a tendency to make men reckless, and Nick had been desperate. Now, desperation had brought him here, to this alley, to this moment, with just a knife in his belt and the waning hope that he would live to see another day. The footsteps got louder and closer, and Nick realized he was running out of time. He ducked behind a rusting dumpster, placing his hand against his side in an unsuccessful attempt to stop the bleeding. His fingers felt moist, and he swallowed hard, the taste of copper strong in his tongue. He could hear Kane now, the quiet, steady breathing of a predator who knows his prey is close. Then came quiet. Nick's heart pounded in his chest, and each beat sounded like a thunderous drum. Has Kane lost him? Or was this just another cruel game, a tactic to prolong the inevitable? The lane was eerily silent, with the only sound being the distant hum of the city beyond, a universe apart from this horror. Nick dared to look around the bin, studying the darkness. Nothing. Maybe. A hand gripped his throat, jerking him backwards with tremendous force. Nick's back smashed against the brick wall, forcing the air out of his lungs. Stars exploded in his vision as he looked into the face of death. Kane's eyes were icy and unblinking, as if he had stopped feeling anything other than the excitement of the hunt. His grasp tightened, cutting off Nick's air supply, and for a moment, there was nothing but the stifling pressure, the burning in his lungs, and the sheer, overwhelming horror of realizing this was it. Then Kane spoke, with a deep, deadly growl. "You shouldn't have run." Nick's vision dimmed at the edges, and his body screamed for oxygen. He clawed at Kane's wrist, but the man did not move. This was how it would end, not in a magnificent battle, not with a heroic last fight, but here, in the filth of an alley, choked by his own fear. But then, something within him snapped. Survival instinct, fury, or pure stubbornness, whatever it was, it rushed through him like lightning. Nick used the last of his strength to drive his knee upward, catching Kane in the ribs. The man grumbled, and his grip loosened just enough for Nick to twist away. He lurched back, breathless, his throat on fire, but he was not finished yet. Kane instantly recovered, twisting his lips into a smile. "Good. I hoped you would fight back." Nick did not spend time with words. He lunged, his knife flashing in the faint lighting. Kane dodged, but not quickly enough. The blade grazed his arm, leaving a small line of scarlet. It was a modest triumph, but it was enough to bolster Nick's determination. He struck again, aiming for Kane's chest, but the man was faster and stronger. A fist struck Nick's jaw, knocking him to the ground. The knife clattered away into the shadows. Nick tasted blood, his mind spinning, but he forced himself to stand, his body screaming in protest. Kane stood over him, wiping the blood from his arm in a slow, deliberate way. "You're tougher than I thought," he confessed, but there was no adoration in his tone, only calculation. "But this ends now." Nick knew he was correct. He was outmatched, outnumbered by his own injuries and tiredness. But he refused to give up without a struggle. As Kane advanced, Nick groped for his sole remaining weapon, a broken bottle laying nearby. He grabbed it tightly, the rough edges digging into his palm. When Kane hit, Nick moved, pushing the glass into the man's side. Kane yelled, his face twisted with pain, but he did not flinch. His palm tightened on Nick's wrist, compressing bone until the bottle slipped from his grip. Then, with savage efficiency, Kane smashed his fist into Nick's damaged side. The ache was excruciating. Nick's vision turned white, and his body convulsed with agony. He collapsed, his strength drained and his will broken. Kane stood above him, breathing heavily and bleeding from his own wounds. For a long time, there was just silence. Then Kane reached down and pulled Nick up by the collar. "You almost had me," he whispered, slightly amused. "But almost isn't enough." Nick had no more words. He hung there, limp, awaiting the final blow. But it didn't arrive. Instead, Kane drew him forward, his voice barely audible in the gloom. "You are coming with me. This is not over." And as the alley enveloped them both, Nick knew one thing for sure, this was only the beginning. Kyle had always considered Claire to be his best friend, someone he trusted entirely, so discovering her betrayal wounded worse than any wound he had ever felt. The discovery that she had been manipulating him, using his vulnerabilities, and ultimately damaging his job and personal life left him reeling, but it also fueled his drive to hold her accountable. Kyle was not the kind to seek petty revenge. Instead, he wanted her to feel the same crushing weight of betrayal, the same hopeless wrath, and he was willing to wait until his retaliation was as devastating as possible. Kyle's initial method of punishing Claire for her betrayal was psychological warfare, a gradual and premeditated loss of her confidence and sanity. He knew Claire took pleasure in her sharp intellect and ability to read people, so he began slowly gaslighting her, sowing doubts about her own senses. He would casually reference discussions that had never occurred, alter her comments in front of others, and then seem perplexed when she questioned him, making her doubt her own recollection. At work, where they were both competing for the same promotion, Kyle began feeding Sarah fake information, allowing her to pitch ideas he knew would fail while discreetly establishing himself as the trustworthy, capable alternative. He watched with amusement as her irritation rose, her once unshakable confidence waned, and her coworkers began to move away from her, detecting insecurity. Kyle tightened the screws as she crumbled, never allowing her to see his role in her breakdown. He documented every mistake she made and every outburst she had, until her professional reputation was in shreds. By the time she recognized what was going on, it was too late. She had lost the promotion, her peers' respect, and, most crucially, her belief in her own judgment. Kyle's second tactic was significantly more personal, targeting the heart of Claire's connections. He knew how much she treasured her inner circle, how she relied on her pals for recognition and support, so he set out to break down those relationships one by one. He began with little, seemingly innocent comments, implying that Claire had been moaning about a friend behind their backs or had dismissed their difficulties. He pretended to be concerned, as if he were simply looking out for them, but the harm was intentional and insidious. He went after her closest friend, Sarah, first, knowing that if he could turn Sarah against Claire, the rest would follow. Kyle created screenshots of text chats in which Claire appeared to mock Sarah's recent split, and then accidentally let Sarah see them. When Claire denied it, Kyle acted as a go-between, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the seed of mistrust had been planted. Sarah withdrew, and Claire, puzzled and upset, became increasingly determined to solve things, which made her appear even more responsible. Her friendships collapsed one by one, and Kyle was there to pick up the pieces, establishing himself as the only person who still cared. Claire was isolated by the time she recognized what was going on. Her support system had vanished, and Kyle delighted in her loneliness, knowing she now knew how it felt to have someone she trusted betray her. The third and last method Kyle punished Claire was by attacking her financially, ensuring that her treachery cost her more than just her pride in relationships, it cost her stability. Kyle knew Claire had been saving for years to buy her dream home, but he also knew she had taken shortcuts that could come back to haunt her. Using his connections, he discreetly informed the IRS about irregularities in her freelance income reports, knowing that an audit would drain her savings on legal fees and fines. He also duped her into engaging in a bogus plan by appearing as a concerned friend who wanted to help her regain her losses. Claire, desperate and already financially pressured, fell for it, investing what little she had left in the fraud. When the truth was out, she was nearly bankrupt, her credit was wrecked, and her goal of owning a home was crushed. Kyle watched from the shadows as she frantically picked up the pieces, knowing she'd never fully recover from the blow. The financial disaster was the final nail in the coffin, confirmation that her betrayal had far-reaching implications beyond her wildest imagination. Kyle finally got his retribution. Claire, once confident and untouchable, was now a shell of her former self, professionally disgraced, emotionally isolated, and financially bankrupt. Kyle had made sure that her betrayal cost her everything, just like it had cost him. He didn't gloat or rub it in her face, he simply went away, pleased that justice had been done. Some may argue that his vengeance was extreme, that he had become as vicious as Claire, but Kyle disagreed. To him, it represented balance and the restoration of the natural order. She had chosen to betray him, and by doing so, she had sealed her own fate. Kyle was only the tool of her repercussions, the unavoidable reckoning for her actions. And as he carried on with his life, he did so with the peaceful confidence that Claire would never cross him again, not because she had learned some moral lesson, but because he had ensured she no longer had the ability to do so.